I've been talking about RPGs a lot on this channel. I think I need to shake things up. So let's take a look at these speedy rodents over there. Sonic Generations. This is my favorite Sonic game. The level design is amazing and filled with all sorts of alternate routes that I'm still learning about to this day. The bosses are engaging and unique, except for Time Eater. Classic Sonic is fun to mess around with, replayability is one of its strongest aspects, and this game remains to be one of, if not the best looking game in the franchise, which is crazy to think about considering that this game is nearly 13 years old. What the fuck? Anyways, it was always a shame that you could only play on consoles. Being able to play has been nearly impossible since it was stuck on the PS3 and Xbox 360. So I was always in support of the game getting a modern re-release. So knowing this, you might assume that I would have been hyped after hearing rumors about its existence, right? Well, after seeing the disastrous state that Sonic Colors Ultimate released in, instead of being hyped, I was more so concerned. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one who felt like this. At that point, I was more than content with the original PC port, which as an aside is a stupidly well-optimized port. But I wouldn't blame you for not giving it a chance after being created by this fucking thing! Thankfully, when the remaster was officially revealed, I was happy to see that it looked exactly the same. But this isn't just some simple remaster, as it also comes with a side mode of its own, featuring everyone's favorite ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog. As more of the trailers came out, the game seemed to be looking better and better, seemingly improving on base generation's weakest aspects, like the story. And that's not even scratching the surface on the other promotional material, like the sponsored animation by Terminal Montage, the charming Chow manga, or the excellent 3-part series Dark Beginnings. If I didn't have a YouTube channel to run, a Savage Tier and 14 to mess with, or a job, I don't know how I could handle waiting for the release date to come. But now, the time for waiting is over. So let's take a look and see if it can live up to the original game it's attached to. But before we actually talk about the Shadow side of the game, let's take a quick look at Sonic's side. After waiting for an eternity for it to load. I did mention that the base game looked mostly unchanged, but you truly can't judge that based on trailers alone, as there are actually some changes to the base game. First off, a new default control scheme. They've all been changed to be the same as Frontier's controls. Right trigger is boost and homing attack is square. Thankfully, if you prefer the original layout, you can change the control type to Legacy, as well as being able to set your own custom settings. And speaking of Frontiers, alternate costumes have been added. So far both characters just have one, but I wouldn't be opposed to seeing more in the future. Like maybe a rider's costume, eh? A new collectible has been added, Chows, which as far as I can tell, don't give you anything for collecting all of them on a stage, but when you do collect one, they show up in white space, making the hub feel much more alive. Just let it be known that sometimes these fuckers blend into the environment so well, I didn't even realize I got them until the pop-up showed me. An invaluable change is that when you collect a red ring, it shows you which ones you've collected so far, what you missed, and best of all, the rings are ordered properly. That was the worst part about when I was playing this game by far. The final gameplay change is that the drop dash from Mania has been added to Classic Sonic's moveset, alongside modern Sonic's. Okay, we have gotta talk about Sega's weird obsession with the drop dash. Now, don't get me wrong, the drop dash is a fun and satisfying move for Sonic, but it just does not work with the boost formula. What made the drop dash so fun to utilize in the classic styled games is that after using it, you could either let the level design build up momentum or jump out of it to retain some of the initial speed, or prepare another drop dash. All of this is useless when you put it on a character that doesn't build momentum and already has an instant speed button that is not only easier to use, but is inarguably faster. You might think, oh well, it might be useful if you happen to be airborne, since the air boost only lasts for less than a second. Counter-argument. That is more efficient. It certainly doesn't help that it suffers the same awful drawback as Frontier's drop dash, that being you cannot use boost until the effect is over. But this time, you have to use the air dash before you can prepare the drop dash, as despite the homing attack being remapped to a different button, no matter what you set the controls to, the jump button will always trigger the air dash. And worst of all, for some asinine reason, the drop dash is a skill that Classic Sonic can remove, but modern Sonic doesn't get that privilege. Why does it work like this? It feels like Sega looked at how people react to the drop dash and based on that, decided that it was God's greatest gift to man and should be shoved into every single Sonic game going forward. The last thing I want to mention before moving on to the main event is the rewritten dialogue, brought to us by Ian Flynn, the Sonic fanbase's own Tetsuya Nomura, a boogeyman that they will blame for ruining our beloved childhood franchises. Or so they say. I will preface this by mentioning that if the reason you hate Flynn's writing is because of how much he references old games, the Generations rewrite is not the example you should use. The game's entire identity is revisiting and celebrating the games that came before it. It's the quintessential anniversary game. If anything, this is the game where throwing around references should be entirely expected. Besides, any rewrite that purges
"You've got this, Sonic"
from the game is automatically goated. With that being said, I find the rewrite somewhat better than the original. In particular, I like how Sonic and Tails actually remember Green Hill and Chemical Plant, and how it leads to them figuring out about the whole time travel thing more gracefully. Although for the lines that didn't get changed, it feels super strange since the deliveries are just different enough for it to feel weird. Like, look at how the "Hey Sonic, enjoy your future" line changes between the two versions.
"Hey Sonic, enjoy your future, it's gonna be great! Hey Sonic, enjoy your future, it's gonna be great!"
I do appreciate that Sonic actually gets to respond to his friends after saving them. What he says isn't anything special, but I'm glad it's here regardless. But there are a few things that I feel worse in the story. I hate that they show classic Eggman after being the Death Egg robot, throwing away the cool twist that he and modern Eggman were working together. It's written with this change in mind, but I'd prefer if they kept the original twist. On a less severe note, I kinda prefer Classic Tails' old voice compared to his current one, Rouge's current voice is god-awful, and no, Sonic, the Time Stones didn't let you travel through time. It was the past and future posts. Isn't that right, Sonic CD enjoyer Sinno?
One problem, Kirb. Where do the signposts get their power? Fucking Sonic, man!
Yeah, shut up. And that's all I have to say about the Sonic side of Sonic X Shadow Generations. I still cannot believe they settled on that name. You can try to convince me that's supposed to be pronounced Sonic Cross Shadow Generations, but when I see those first three words, my first thoughts aren't going to be about crossovers. At least not in the way that you're thinking. By the way, huge spoiler warning for Shadow Generations. I'm basically going to be talking about everything here since it ended up lasting around 4 hours. Before we actually talk about Shadow Generations, I appreciate the addition of a story recap for Shadow, so that newcomers to the series can learn more about him. The game opens up with a flashback to Shadow being awakened for the first time, before quickly flashing forward to the present, where Maria and Gerald are long gone, and the rooms are shrouded in darkness. So what is Shadow doing back on the Ark? Go watch Dark Beginnings, but the TLDR is that Shadow suspects that the villains from his own game, the Black Arms, have returned. Shortly after Rouge calls Shadow and tells him that he's being a dick and missing Sonic's birthday party, he spots a distortion in the distance and rushes to investigate, later finding out that the Black Arms leader, Black Doom, has been revived. But before Shadow gets the chance to stop Black Doom, he quickly retreats. After finding and taking the fake Chaos Emerald Tails created in SA2, the Time Eater shows up, does his whole Time Eater thing, and sends Shadow to white space. Also, Omega is here for no reason. At this point, the gameplay loop is the same as Sonic Generations. Play through 2 acts of a remastered stage, one primarily played in 3D and the other primarily in 2D, restoring the white space and getting some sort of story afterwards. The main difference in Shadow Generations is that along the way, you'll get the new Doom powers. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the gameplay fundamentals. The basic controls are pretty much the exact same as Sonic Generations. You got the boost, homing attack, stomp, and quick step, with the only notable exception being the removal of the lightspeed dash, drift, and air dash, being replaced with the double jump. I'd rather we have the air dash instead, since the double jump always felt awkward to me in the boost games. After all, Sonic games naturally lean towards horizontal movement much more than vertical. A minor difference that I noticed is that compared to Sonic, Shadow's boosting controls are a lot looser, so much so that it led me to using the quick step less frequently than moving to the side manually. The major difference between the two hedgehogs are Shadow's Chaos powers. The triangle button will allow you to use Chaos Spear, which activates switches, stuns enemies, and has some speedrun tech that may or may not be intended. After collecting enough energy from defeating enemies, you don't fill up your boost gauge. Rather, you charge up a separate gauge that lets you use Chaos Control, stopping time for 5 seconds, which allows you to take alternate routes, save yourself from oncoming hazards, and take out multiple enemies at once, which more often than not, tend to refill the gauge and have yet another Chaos Control ready. This ability also pauses the timer, which I'm a little mixed on. For one, it can make getting S ranks a lot easier, but on the other, you can use this to cheese S ranks. Ultimately, I don't really have a solid opinion on this, and it can easily be brushed off with the you control the buttons you press argument. But that's not all the Shadow's moveset, as like I mentioned earlier, you'll gain Doom powers throughout the game. Doom Spears is an upgrade to Chaos Spear, allowing up to 5 to be fired at once. Doom Blast launches an enemy, typically a Black Arms, up in the air. Shadow will then teleport to launch them in a different direction, and then teleport again to deliver the finishing blow. Doom Surf is much simpler to explain. It allows for water traversal, and it has a spin attack that can knock obstacles out of the way. Doom Morph sucks. Its implementation is clunky, its moveset isn't explained well, and it controls like ass. The only good thing about it is I have the easiest Frontiers joke to make with it. The final Doom power is Doom Wing, functioning as this game's super form, requiring 50 rings to activate, draining your rings while the transformation is active, and granting a gliding ability while boosting. This also means that there's no Super Shadow here, since Sonic is gathering the Chaos Emeralds for his side of the story. The Doom powers are all amazing additions to Shadow's moveset, not only because the idea of Shadow tapping into his Black Arms DNA is a compelling concept, but for the way they factor into the gameplay. My favorite has to be Doom Blast, because of all the alternate routes you can access with it, and you basically do Dragon Ball combos with it. The level design is top notch, perfectly understanding what made the levels in base generations so fun, while adding in some of its own secret sauce into the mix. I can already see myself replaying these levels over and over again, much like in the original game. In fact, I'm guessing that in the span of this video's production, I'll have replayed each stage around 10 times? Okay, if you let me go off script for a little bit, I have played each stage around 10 times at the moment of recording this voiceover. This is thanks to the game's online mode, which, much like in the original generations, is just a simple leaderboard to compare your stage times with everyone else, or just your friends. It's no match, you fuckers. You can't stop the flames of disaster! This is great and all, but what about that secret sauce I mentioned earlier? Well, in certain levels, Doom's Eye will come in and transform the level into a radical highway. But personally, when I see these sections that take you back to a city-themed level featuring Black Doom, there's a different level that comes to mind. But these segments end up being the most visually abstract parts of the whole game, although I didn't really need to say that. All I had to do was show stuff like the building kaleidoscopes. One thing I really love about this selection of stages is that every level has some sort of important connection with Shadow. Final Rush takes place in the Ark and is the final stage before he and Sonic fight at the end of SA2. Rail Canyon is where Team Dark discovers the existence of Shadow androids. Kingdom Valley is where Shadow meets Mephiles, the character that takes on his form. Sunset Heights is where Sonic confronts Shadow and Forces, and is the first ever level in episode Shadow. Chaos Island. And Radical Highway is Shadow's first ever level, where he declares his revenge on humanity. Honestly, the only thing about these levels I can say is a genuine negative is that for a game centered around Shadow revisiting his past, there's not a single level based on his own game. I feel like one of the Black Comet levels would make for a great fit and would have added some variety in the level themes. But I can't be too harsh on this aspect. I mean, this game gave us Rail Canyon with functional rail swapping, an 06 level where Shadow doesn't move at the speed of molasses, 2 Forces level that last longer than 2 minutes, and 2D sections in Chaos Island that don't piss me off just by existing. But yeah, about that. It does feel super weird that we got levels based on Forces and Frontiers when chronologically, they haven't happened yet. I know Generations is all about time travel and all, but it's always been about going back, not forward. But considering what they did to these levels, it's certainly not the worst thing in the world. The bosses are super fucking sick. All of them, really. Each and every one of them are A-tier gold, and much like the stages, you'll want to replay them over and over. BioLizard is such a great first boss. I especially like how it initially plays out exactly the same as its Adventure 2 counterpart, before going in a completely new direction after the first hit. Metal Overlord is here to fill out the same niche as Perfect Chaos, as the Adventure Era Supersonic final boss that no longer requires Supersonic to beat to show how much stronger the characters have become. Also, Water and Crush 40 are present. Also, I like how when you use Chaos Control, it doesn't cause Metal to freeze, since, as he states after using the ability, he copied that power from Shadow and Heroes. But I have to give major props to Mephiles. I love his boss battle, and it's not just from a gameplay standpoint, but from how he's characterized here. Instead of being the cold, calculated manipulator he was in 06, He's become a more pathetic character, desperately clawing at this opportunity to return to the canon timeline. And the fact that he's voiced by Robbie Daymond helps a lot.
Teammates! Friends! To hell with that!
His fight is also like the one instance where I feel like Doomorph actually feels well designed. I mean, look at just how well I deal with his Tilted Towers attack.
Welcome to Tilted Towers.
All these fights end up looking super impressive as well. It's clear how much Frontiers impacted them here. They're flashy, fun, and have excellent themes to boot. If I had to critique one thing regarding the bosses, it'd have to be the lack of a boss fight with Sonic. Like, I can't be the only one who saw this scene in one of the trailers and expected to see a new take on this fight from Shadow's perspective. Unfortunately, this encounter is purely a cutscene. At least it's a pretty neat cutscene, particularly when Shadow and Sonic quote themselves at each other, when Shadow almost uses a Doom power in Sonic but stops himself, wanting to beat Sonic using his own strength rather than Black Doom's, and when he reveals that the Emerald Sonic took after defeating him is the fake one, thus giving an in-universe reason as to why you don't lose Chaos Control after this point. Hell, it could have gone the other way around, with Shadow being forced to substitute the real one with the fake. After all, Sonic was able to use Chaos Control with it, and he'd never done it before at that point. And now that I'm mentioning it, it does have some potential in a certain part in the finale, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. Whitespace is once again the hub, but instead of being a bunch of platforms in a 2D plane so classic Sonic is able to traverse it, it uses the open zone format from Frontiers, and much like in Frontiers, it's a great fit for this type of game. Each level has a character placed there, but unlike Sonic's campaign, they aren't frozen, and their placement has absolutely no correlation to the stage. You can imagine my reaction to leaving Kingdom Valley and seeing Big the motherfucking cat just standing around it for no reason. There are 6 different collectibles. Keys to open boss gates, which you get the same way as in Sonic Generations, beat the challenge stages that spawn after approaching the gate for the first time, ship parts which can be donated to Orbot and Cubebot, who hope to build a ship to find Eggman since they have no idea what happened to him after he flew towards the Time Eater. Donating a certain amount to them will give you the same rewards as the next 3 collectibles, collection keys. These can be found in every stage, each of them having 3 to find. These can be used to unlock chests found in Whitespace. These chests contain plot summaries of games Shadows appears in, music tracks that can replace the standard level tracks, and pieces of concept art throughout the series. One thing to note is that the keys need to match the chest, so you can't use a lore key to open an art chest. The final collectible are pages from Gerald's journal, which are found in drones that need to be destroyed using Chaos Spear. Now while these are all the collectibles, there is one final thing you can do in the hub world, these mini challenges that you do in the hub itself. These are typically very simple ones, such as collecting a certain amount of rings or collecting a series of items in a given time limit, and these give the same rewards as mentioned earlier. All the rewards can be used in the collection room, accessed from the pause menu, and the one thing I want to highlight is that in order to read up on Shadow's history, you need to get on the bike from Shadow the Hedgehog's intro. After beating the game, you can activate Doom mode in the hub, changing it to look like how it did in the finale, making hard versions of the bosses available, and unlocking new challenges. Let's get back to the story. After all, I mentioned earlier, but before release, Shadow Generations looked like it was absolutely gonna nail its story. After arriving in Whitespace, 3 concerning details are shown. The first is Shadow's strange mutations that grant him access to his Doom powers. Despite Shadow claiming that they are things that he shouldn't be able to do, they feel natural to control. The second is the ominous object in the sky watching all of Whitespace, called the Black Moon, which reacts to the objects that Doom's eye drops in the Radical Highway intermissions. The final one is the sudden return of Maria and Gerald. Let's start from the bottom of that list. Once Shadow saves Maria from some black arms, he deduces that both her and Gerald come from a time before Gunn's raid on the Ark. After taking note of how Shadow's new powers react to the Black Moon growing in power, Gerald theorizes that this is because of the Black Arm's DNA used to create Shadow, and Black Doom is augmenting that DNA in order to turn Shadow into a loyal minion or a vessel for Doom to possess. Black Doom descends to basically confirm this theory, and Shadow is not happy to hear this, and in his anger, nearly succumbs to Doom's influence before Maria steps in to express how much it hurts her to see Shadow consumed by anger, and tells him the meaning behind his name. Without light, there is only darkness, but a shadow will show you where to find the light. After realizing he has lost his way in obtaining the final Doom power, he is able to resist Black Doom's influence, and will no longer fight with anger in his heart, but with Maria's wish to protect humanity. With the ability to reach the Black Moon, Shadow wastes no time in facing the final challenge. I really like how for the finale of this game, they end up choosing Shadow's first level, Radical Highway. It contrasts heavily with his final level from SA2 being the opening level in this game. Not only from a gameplay standpoint, but from a story one, since this is the point where Shadow lets go of his destructive anger he's been bottling up since that point in SA2. This is also the only level where the second act is also a 3D level, making both acts a fantastic method to show off Doom Wings, since you kinda get the gist of 2D Doom Wings in the brief moment you're temporarily given it at the beginning of the game. I love the amount of times in both acts where you can go the intended route, but say fuck that and fly in the other direction, making this a really fun set of final levels. With both acts cleared, Shadow confronts Black Doom, choosing to fight Shadow as Devil Doom, the final boss of his original game. This fight utilizes all the Doom powers in a climactic final boss with an awesome second form, Neo Devil Doom, with an amazing remix of All Hail Shadow playing with this phase of the fight. As a final boss, Time Eater has no hope of being in the same league as this. I mean, it's not hard to top the fight where you hold the boost button for 5 hours while being yelled at about homing shots. Literally the only things I'm not entirely on board with is the Doom Morph section, and when Shadow deals the final blow to Neo Devil Doom, he totally should have said, "This is who I am." That would have been an awesome way to reference one of the most iconic lines from Shadow the Hedgehog. I say one of because...
This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
Oh yeah, and this part where Neo Devil Doom uses Chaos Control to stop the final hit is the moment where the fake Emerald could have enhanced the finale. Its weaker power could have been an explanation as to why Shadow broke out of Doom's Chaos Control. Then again, there's no evidence that Doom used Shadow's Emerald. It could have just been a natural ability of this new form. With the Black Moon destroyed, Shadow's Black Arms DNA reverts to its original state, thus leaving Shadow without the Doom powers at his disposal. Rouge steps in to take Shadow's Emerald and swap it with Sonic's fake Emerald, as he's about to fight the Time Eater. However, with Doom's influence over White Space gone, the anomaly that brought Maria and Gerald here begins to heal. This leads them to being sent back to their own time. Shadow, not ready to let them go again, tries to run off and take the Emerald back from Rouge and use it to stop time. But Maria urges him not to do it, and reminds him that even if fate draws them apart, she'll be in his heart forever. As they fade away, Shadow rushes ahead, shedding a single tear, thus ending Shadow Generations. Damn, what a game. Much like how the final boss runs circles around Sonic Generations, this story does the same. To make one last comparison to Shadow's first game, in there, Shadow accepts who he is and puts his past behind him. And here, the past is put right in front of him, ending with him committing to that decision. There's some other supplemental moments worth mentioning as well. I already mentioned the Battle of Sonic, but there's Shadow considering the idea of preventing Maria and Gerald's death after figuring out they come from before the Ark raid, as well as clarifying the exact reason why Maria was taken to the Ark, as her condition has no cure. The Ark could keep her condition in check, and how despite this, her family was opposed to the idea. However, there are a couple issues with how it's presented, mainly because of the fact that the level's titles are on full display during the cutscenes. You could be invested in a cutscene with Maria and Shadow, but get completely taken out of it with Sunset Heights loudly announcing its presence in the background. The other issue has to be two characters' voice acting. You can probably already guess one of them, and yes, it's Rouge. Her voice is way too high-pitched to fit her character, and Gerald's voice is literally just the Frontier's Eggman voice. Also, both of these characters' voice actors are like terrible people. Please recast them. Sonic Generations was already my favorite Sonic game, but with this game attached to it with this re-release, that spot is now uncontestable. Any future games will have an insane bar to clear if they want to take that spot away, but I welcome any games that make the attempt with open arms. Just please let it have original levels. We can't keep reusing themes like this.